Welcome to the Alain Guillot podcast, a podcast about life, leadership, and money matters. Our guest today is Casey Gueren. Casey is a former executive editor and health director at Self magazine. She's an award-winning journalist and a strategic content manager for some of the largest media brands. And today, we will speak about her book, It's Probably Nothing, the stressless guide to dealing with health anxiety, wellness fat, and overhyped headlines. Casey, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, Casey, the first thing that I would like to know is how did you get into this field of expertise? You tell us about how you landed in this magazine and then you moved to the other one, but yeah, share that information with the listeners.
Yeah, well, I was always really into magazines growing up. I loved getting a lot of my information and especially health and life information from magazines. So I always wanted to be on those mastheads with people. And in college, I studied journalism and psychology because it seemed like both of those are important to break into magazine publishing, and especially for the kind of content that I wanted to write. And then I started interning. I interned at Cosmo, at Women's Health, at Psychology Today. And then after graduation, I landed a job as an editorial assistant at Cosmopolitan magazine in New York. Yes, it was like my dream job. So much fun as you would think. And I was there for a little bit, and then I went to Women's Health magazine. I went to BuzzFeed as their health editor, and then eventually made it over to Self magazine. And really at that point, doing a lot of digital health content, and just so interesting to be on that side of it when I also was someone who, was Googling my health symptoms and always had a lot of questions about my health and my body. So I guess that's kind of what brought me into it was, personal interest. And then, once I got to talking to all these experts, I was like, this is the best job ever. I get to just talk to interesting doctors and researchers all day long.
And were you always, or at times, what I like to call a health nut, one of those persons who wake up at 5 o'clock, creates their first smoothie, then they do the bicycling routine, or just you just were interested into this subject and the writing and reading of it?
Yeah, I wouldn't really describe myself as a health nut. I mean, my dad definitely introduced me to like weightlifting and stuff pretty early in high school. So I had an interest in health and fitness. But I also just was really fascinated by the kind of health content that I would see in magazines growing up. So learning about your body in ways that you weren't really learning about in school and in your health class and your sex ed class. So I really loved that I could get that accessible, inclusive information somewhere else. And so when I got to Cosmo, I was writing a little bit of everything and helping all of the editors. But I noticed that the Cosmo Gyno and Cosmo Body pages were the ones that were just the most interesting to me to write, because I got to call up these doctors and ask them questions that all of us are kind of wondering about, of like, what's that weird feeling or smell or pain or bump? And get to distill that information to an audience that was like me growing up. So I wouldn't say I was always, not a green juice drinker, but I definitely had those questions a lot. And I feel like I'm not the only one.
Wow. There was a time in my life in which I was into bodybuilding and I went completely nuts. I mean, from
Really?
counting each calorie that I did to counting each repetition to
Yeah.
measuring my sleeping hours. And it's just a spiral life that just goes deeper and deeper. But
It does.
okay, how common is this of people suffering, and I don't know if suffering is the right word, but having anxiety about their health and constantly looking up whether they have symptoms that may be something serious or not? Is this like a small segment of the population, or is this like every one of us have it at one time or another in our life?
Right. It's really hard to say. I mean, when I was researching for this book, I, of course, started with that question, like, am I the only one that freaks out about this stuff, or do a lot of people? And the answer I got from experts was really interesting. They said, when people, everyone can relate to this to some extent, right? Like you have a headache and you're worried it's something more serious, or right now, you cough once and you're like, oh my gosh, do I have COVID? But there are some of us who are more preoccupied with what's going on in our bodies and are more in tune to those little changes and blips. And those symptoms relate to two disorders, mental health disorders in the DSM. And so we have some estimates of how many people meet the criteria for those disorders, but it's still really hard to estimate, because often if you are someone who's freaking out about a lot of body symptoms, you're probably going to a doctor, not a psychologist. So you're probably not ending up in the therapist's office to talk about this and to kind of be counted in those percentages until you've exhausted a lot of options. So the estimates that we have from the DSM say that it could be anywhere from 1% to 10% of people meet the criteria for these kinds of mental health conditions, which again would be that you're preoccupied and worried about this to an extent that it's interfering with your day-to-day life.
Right. And can you tell us what are the two absolute extreme, from the person who stays up to 3 o'clock in the morning looking up diseases to the person who could be dying off and he just doesn't, or he or she doesn't just care about it, that's
right.
they're too
And
busy living.
what's so funny is actually both of those can be types of health anxiety. So that was really shocking to me, is that I always associated health anxiety with, we hear about, being a hypochondriac and going to a bunch of doctors and not wanting to leave until you have a diagnosis. And so that's often what people think is the person that always thinks they're sick, always thinks they have symptoms, and they're reassurance seeking a lot through going to medical professionals, getting a lot of tests run. And then there's the person that I kind of relate more to, in maybe I'm freaking out about something, but I do not want to go to the doctor and have that confirmed. I'm afraid of what they're going to tell me if I go. And that kind of avoidant type of health anxiety is also, talked about in the DSM as a criteria. So of course you could just be someone who, I have friends and family who are like, it's fine, it's whatever, I'm not going to go to the doctor. And that wouldn't be, an avoidant type. That would just be, you're not concerned about it. And that's great for you. That must be very, very calming. But if you're someone who you do have those worries and concerns about your health and your body, whether you're going to the doctor almost too much or not enough, those both can be two ends of how you experience health anxiety.
On the avoidance type, how much is it real avoidance and how much is it that the system makes it difficult? For example, I live in Canada, and here supposedly healthcare is free, and it's free, but I have to almost get in a waiting line to get into the waiting line to spend a whole day to see if maybe I will get to see a doctor. So it's not like I'm trying to avoid going to a doctor, but it's such a huge hassle. And then the people who manage to go to a doctor, the doctor is on a clock. You got your 5 minutes and get out. I gotta see the next patient. So I wonder how much is just the avoidance and how much it's really is not worth the hassle. I just rather die of cancer than just stand online all day long to see if I get.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's such a great question. And it's something I talk about in the book, is that so much of this is attributed to the just systemic barriers to accessing good quality health care. And, we think of it in the States as really just like whether you have health insurance or not, but that's really not, as you said, the only thing. You have to have those hours off of work, that entire day maybe that you can spend waiting to see a provider. That might include needing to find childcare, needing to find transportation to go to these appointments. There might be a language barrier when you go there and you can't really interact with the doctor the way that you want. There's so many barriers to accessing good care. And I do think that for some people, it's not a matter of, I don't want to go to the doctor. It's, I do not have the option, or I can't afford it. It's not accessible to me. And so a lot of the wellness fads and trends that I talk about in my book, I feel like are responding to these cracks in the system. They're saying, it's so hard for you to go to the doctor. Why don't you just try, my miracle pill instead? And there's just no wonder why these things are so tempting to us.
Right. Okay. Well, let me ask you about you. So you have been busy writing for all these magazines. You're editor of this, and editor of the other one. And then you decide to quit your job and be on your own. So and write this book. So can you take us to this? What was going on in your mind? What were you thinking of?
Yeah, a lot. So I started writing this book. I got the book deal in October 2019. So, about 6 months before this pandemic really started in the States. And I, at the time, was the executive editor of Self magazine. So as things started ramping up, me reporting on this book, at the same time, COVID is starting to happen, and we're reporting on that. And there were just so many days and nights where I was just spread too thin. And it was ironic because, I'm reporting this health and wellness book. And at the same time, I am freaking out about my own health and wellness, that of my colleagues, my employees, my family, my friends. And it was just a lot. And I have been in this industry and in these editorial roles for over 10 years now. And it just felt like a time where, what, I kind of want to focus on this. I want to take a step back and see if I can get back to just the writing and reporting that made me fall in love, with health journalism. And so taking that step off the media ladder was definitely hard. There was a lot going through my mind of, oh my gosh, what's it going to be like to not be, at the top of these mastheads anymore. But it's actually been really fantastic to get to work with so many different outlets at once now. And a lot of my book is about making this kind of health information more accessible, more responsible, making it something that when you Google these questions, you find the best information. And so it's been kind of cool to get to work with different outlets on that instead of just one.
Well, from reading your book, I feel that you are a responsible journalist, or you were. But I mean, I've been listening to marketing books, and I hear that 80 cents of the dollar is on the headline,
Yeah.
and that journalists, although they go
Yeah.
into great amount of time and effort to write an informative article, they have to write this amazing headline that will create a click so that people can read the rest of the article. So I
Yeah.
wonder how much is also, I mean, as a journalist, you are trying to help out people, giving them information, but also how much is a part of the problem of creating this desire to constantly look for more information. Like I read some of the titles that you have published in the magazines, and they look
Mhm.
quite enticing.
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny that you say that because I do think the headline, is what most people see first, of course. And there is that question always of, do I, I want people to read this article that I spent so much time reporting and so much time interviewing experts for, but if no one clicks on it, it's not going to matter how good that article is. It's not going to matter all of the reporting and research that's in there. So you do have to, compete with everything else that is grabbing people's attention right now. And I don't think that that means that you should cut corners and use some salacious headline to get people to click. It should still be accurate to what is in the article, of course. But I do think, that's why I tell people always read more than the headline. If a headline drew you in, don't just remember that headline and go, repeat it to your friends and family. And, oh, did you read about this? Unless you actually read about it, because there is so much more to the story, especially when we're talking about health and wellness and all of those studies that come out and, it says like, this is going to raise your risk of cancer by 10, 20%. Well, you're not getting the actual contextualized numbers. You're not finding out if that research was done in people or in mice. Like there's just so many questions that you're not going to get answered from the headline itself.
Right. And you mentioned in your book how big is the wellness industry. So can you tell us how much money is it on people? And now we have all these media, all these influencers, and some
Right.
of them are really doing harm as well. Like I see
Yeah.
the anti-vaxxer influencers, and I say, oh my God, how can this
Right.
people? So yeah, tell us about the size of the wellness industry and how
Oh,
make
yeah.
people make money.
it is a huge, thriving industry. It's trillions of dollars. I mean, and this is, of course, worldwide. This isn't just an issue in the States, but I do think that a lot of it is, responding to what they think, people aren't getting from traditional medical care, right? And so there are there's so much money to be made in this arena, whether it is with supplements, with, different kind of services that, again, are going to be a little bit more convenient or a little bit more discreet than maybe going to your regular doctor. And so this is a industry. And I think that people often look to any of these innovators as, oh, they're going to be more empathetic or more convenient or better than going to a regular doctor. And I think that, I don't know where maybe that belief came from, that we just assume that they're going to have more of our best interests at heart. It might be because those places often have more time to listen to our concerns, and they are marketing these products for people who are fed up with the system. So I understand, of course, if you're not getting your care taken care of at a doctor, that you're going to look elsewhere. But I do want people to remember that that is a money-making industry. And it is, like you said, a lot of marketing. So when you see these influencers saying that this thing, cured their gut issues or helped their insomnia or helped them relax, you have to remember that those are anecdotal reports, that a lot of this is marketing, and that you should hold it to the same criteria that you would a medication that your doctor recommends. Like, you would want to know, well, what are the possible side effects, and how do we know this works, and how does it work? We just often assume, like, oh, if something says it's more natural, I don't have to ask those questions. And you absolutely should.
Right. Okay. So how do we uh, self-defense against all these titles and all this information? How can we decipher the garbage from something that maybe I should go ahead and read the whole article?
Yeah. Well, I have a few tips in my book for how to do that. And a few of my favorites are, looking out for these specific red flags that something is not necessarily the most legitimate. So, one being, is this a lot of marketing jargon of just trying to make you feel bad about something or make you scared about something so that you'll buy their product? That's a huge red flag for me. If something's like, you don't know what's in your tampons, or you don't know what's in your soap, like no, we do. It's fine. These are regulated things. What's out there is fine. The other is someone giving a lot of advice like this or products without the certifications that you want to see behind them. So if someone is giving out, actual health advice to their followers, they should have the credentials to back that up. An influencer is going to try to sell anything on their Instagram page, but if they are not actually a doctor or a registered dietitian, they probably shouldn't be giving you that supplement.
Right.
Same as you were talking about with bodybuilding before, we often see, a trainer or a physical therapist giving these nutrition tips and advice. And we often think, well, they're a health expert, they know what they're talking about. But you want to look for the more specific credentials that would make them an expert in that specific field. Another thing is just to have kind of a short list of the brands and the outlets that you trust for getting your health information. So again, not to say that, you have to only go to the CDC or the FDA or the World Health Organization. You can go to these outlets that you know and trust and enjoy reading, but really look to the ones that have a good track record of reporting on health responsibly. Do they show their sourcing always? Do they interview the experts? Do they tell you where this information and this advice is coming from? Or is it kind of a question mark when you go in and you're trying to figure out where that study actually is, or where that data is coming from?
Right. Okay. And also, how should we all learn to listen to our body when we see something like I don't know, a mole that I never seen before? How do I know if this is something that I should be concerned about, or just just let it be for a little bit longer?
Right. Well, I think that, again, it really depends on the person, but if you are someone who will pay attention to every little tiny change around your body, which is definitely me, you do have to kind of set up some rules and boundaries for yourself so that you're not spiraling every time you notice something a little bit different or off in your body. If you're someone who, you're not paying too much attention and you notice something, it seems weird, it feels weird, this isn't normal for you, absolutely go see your healthcare provider. But I have a tip in the book of the 24-hour rule. If you're someone who you can escalate from 0 to I'm dying of cancer, in a few minutes when you see a new mole, then give yourself 24 hours. Nothing's going to happen in those 24 hours, probably, unless you're like bleeding on fire, you're really debilitated. But if it's something small, try not to let yourself spiral and freak out. Say, if this is still bothering me tomorrow, I will look into it. I will call the doctor. But if you're someone who tends to spiral, you got to try to give yourself those guardrails.
I am addicted to coffee, and every other week I see a headline, oh, coffee is not good for you. And then the new research study, oh, coffee is great for you. It stimulates you. So I have given up on that, on even reading about that debate, because it's just crazy.
Coffee is one of the best examples of that. It's so funny how often you will see contradictory headlines. If you pay attention, it's like every year. You're right. There's a new study that comes out that coffee is either killing you or curing cancer. And so with those, you have to remember that these are all one-off studies. They're being reported on because a new study came out that these health journalists like myself are like, oh, great, let's tell people about that. But you want to look for something like that, how does this ingredient affect my health and my day-to-day living? You want to look at the broad body of evidence on this. So you're never going to be, just looking at one single study write-up. Most experts are not going to tell you to change a big part of your life based on a single study. But you want to look for things like meta-analyses and big systematic reviews, because those are the ones that are going to be pooling all of the evidence that we have on a subject and giving you kind of the cliff notes of how worried you need to be about your coffee habit, which you don't unless you're drinking an obscene amount.
Well, Casey, I think this has been extremely helpful. All my anxieties have been subsided. Thank you so much. Can you tell us one more time the title of the book and where can the listeners follow the work that you do?
Absolutely. So it's probably nothing. The Stress Less Guide to Dealing with Health Anxiety, Wellness Fads, and Overhyped Headlines. And you can buy it anywhere books are sold right now. You can buy it on Amazon, Target, Walmart, any of your local bookstores. You might have to call and ask, but they can definitely get it in. And you can follow me at Casey Gueren on Instagram and Twitter to see what I'm writing about.
Casey, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much.